All right, let's talk about Buddy Holly. Buddy Holly is without a doubt probably the most unsung hero when it comes to American music history, certainly when it comes to rock and roll. Don't tell your grandmothers this, but he is more important than Elvis. Yeah, I totally just said that. Um, Buddy Holly's a big deal for a number of reasons. One, probably the biggest deal, is that he basically laid the musical foundation for what the Beatles would do early on. Your first Beatle recordings were of Buddy Holly covers. And they have been quoted as basically saying that he was their biggest influence, like in that they spent a lot of time trying to copy his sound. Early hits like "Love Me Do" and things like that are basically them trying to mimic Buddy Holly. So that's a pretty big deal. So that's first. Second, he actually wrote his own material. Many times back in the 50s, artists didn't write their own songs. There would be a songwriter, or they would take a previous hit and repackage it. An example would be Elvis and Hound Dog. That was actually a Big Mama Thornton hit, 1940s, I believe. And then Elvis does it in the 50s, and they repackage it and they call it something different. They say, hey, this is this new sound called rock and roll. So yeah, basically a hit that had already been out, but they just repackaged it with a different artist. Buddy Holly also played guitar, and he did it well. Common things is that he would use most, if not all, strings on his guitar. It's very common to play all six strings and to play a lot of downstrokes. So once again, making his sound extremely percussive. Also, his music is very accessible. It's just three kids in a band. It's not like a superstar out front who's young and popular with a band of 40 and 50-year-olds backing them up. It's basically three kids, three young adults in a band. You know, it's pretty hard to play songs on your own whenever there's backup singers and there's horns like a saxophone and things like that, and a piano and all these other instruments. Thinking back to Bill Haley and of course backup singers when it comes to like the early Elvis and things like that. Um, Buddy Holly, Buddy Holly. There's just three of them. You can go buy a guitar and you can learn some Buddy Holly tunes and you can perform them. Pretty easy. Also, he's of note when it comes to the Fender guitar. He's the first mainstream artist to use Fenders and to make them popular. Fenders like Stratocasters, that was his definitely his signature instrument, and it definitely added to his sound. Buddy Holly being from Texas, also he would have those early country music, like Texas swing influences that would have been popular, in the area of like in that area of the country. So Buddy Holly's a pretty big deal. He's probably the biggest deal when it comes to rock and roll history that nobody talks about anymore. People talk about Elvis, and I get it. When it comes to Elvis, he did what he did, but he also was going mainstream and commercial going into the 1960s. So as he was kind of separating himself from his early rock and roll roots, he was doing, like Christmas albums. My point is that it got a little big. It got a little commercial. Buddy Holly was doing that as well. He was starting to lean that way whenever he had moved to New York City. He was doing some things with like string orchestras backing him up and so forth and so on. Although he didn't really get to do a whole lot of that because, of course, he died in 1959, the day that music died, when when he and a bunch of other headliners were on tour. Clear Lake, Iowa. They go there. They play at the Surf Ballroom. They get a plane to leave to get to their next stop, which I believe was Moorhead, Minnesota. They do that to get no, it's Fargo maybe was their next stop. I can't remember. Anyways, it was the Midwest in the winter. I think they were I think they were flying into Moorhead, Minnesota, and they were gonna make their way to Fargo. So, anyways, yeah, pretty terrible. Plane goes down. He dies. The Big Bopper dies. Richie Valens dies. Richie Valens was about to blow up. He was about to become a huge star. I think he was like 18. So, pretty terrible thing. That certainly would have been a moment in your life when you would have certainly uh, like remembered where you were, who you were with, what the weather was like. One of those like one of those like bookmarks, in life that you just don't forget. So, anyways, those are some thoughts on Buddy Holly. Thanks.